Hi, welcome to the Lisa Saunders Show. As you know, I'm an author and I'm very interested in books, and I've just recently become friendly with a book reviewer, John Valeri, book reviewer with Hartford Book Examiner. Did I say that right?
You did. That was great.
And your name, I pronounced it correctly?
You did.
All right, and now, aside from being a reviewer, what else are you?
What am I not? Oh,
All right, your real job, the real job.
my real job. I work in nonprofit human services. I am senior program manager at a day program. We work with individuals, adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities.
Well, thank you for doing that.
It's my pleasure to do that. It's one of those jobs where, you can actually occasionally see that you're helping to make a difference. So I don't think anybody does it for the money, but it's nice when you can actually see that you've helped somebody. So that's a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you. Now about you as a book reviewer. I've been with you on a couple of personal book reviewers with friends of mine. And then you also just did mine. And what shocked me is that you ask very deep questions.
I was shocked when somebody said you ask very deep questions. I said, I do? That was a mistake.
Well, before we get to some of your deep questions, and now I'm going to fire back and ask you some deep questions. What are some of the books that maybe people have heard of where you've interviewed the author?
Sure. There have been a lot. I'm always surprised at how willing people are to talk about their books, regardless of how well known they are or not. I think that tends to come from the fact that writing is very solitary.
Right.
And so, after a year or 2 years or however long of holding up in your room with your voices in your head, you have this book and people actually want to talk to you, and it's like this social reemergence. I'm just attributing it to that. I could be wrong.
You're probably right.
Maybe, hopefully. But I've been really fortunate to be able to talk to authors sort of all statures, so local, regional, national, people who are known across the world. So some of the bigger names, James Patterson, Jodi Picoult, locally Wally Lamb, who's very well known, but who resides in Connecticut, Mary Higgins Clark, who is just gracious and wonderful. One of my personal favorites is Marcia Clark, who was the prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial, and now she's a crime novelist.
Wow.
And she's pretty big now and sort of having a resurgence of sorts with the American Crime Story miniseries on FX. But then, too, Connecticut's really, really rich in talent ourselves. We have you, Lisa. So many authors. So I was worried initially that there wouldn't be enough to talk about, and now I'm finding 7 years later that I can't keep up with everybody I want to interview and all the books that I want to review.
So you've been doing this for 7 years.
Yeah, 7 years in February was my anniversary. I don't know where the time went.
Now, were you surprised by any of the answers from the more well-known authors, or intrigued by them, or do a lot of us authors think alike, whether we're big time or small time?
I think, yes, surprisingly. People are just very passionate about the stories that they want to tell and reaching as large an audience as they can. So I found that, the big names are typically just as pleasant and thought-provoking as anybody else.
Now, am I the only one that had to get help answering the questions you sent me, or am I the only one that admitted it?
You're just the only one brave enough to admit it, I think.
Now, for my book, Once Upon a Placemat, a table-setting tale, I'm thinking he's going to ask me some easy questions. It's a short fairy tale. I think it's like 1,000 words at most, or 800.
But you packed a wallop in those 800 to 1,000 words.
Oh, did I? All right, is that why you were paying me back? Because you're asking me this question. This story educates and informs. How do you endeavor to balance the two? And, in your opinion, what is the importance of storytelling in the development of young minds? And here my mother's a school teacher, and I said, Ma, how am I supposed to answer that?
So you read that to me, and I'm like, where did that come from? I wrote that? Sorry. No.
Oh my gosh, I'm just telling it because of the way it's supposed to be told, and I don't think in concrete answers like that. So I had to call my friend Julie Russell, who thinks like you do.
Scary, there's more than one of us.
So she did have to help me answer that so I could tell you. Now, is it unfair that is it bad that I'm telling you I had to get help?
No, I'm all for honesty. I think we could all benefit from a little bit of help. professional or otherwise.
All right, and the other question I thought was difficult that you asked me was, many people underestimate the difficulty of writing for children. Having written for both young and older audiences, what are the unique challenges of doing so, and why do both demographics appeal to you? So that really came from your heart, and you were just curious?
Well, it did because it intrigued me, because a lot of authors tend to write for the same audience over time. That's not to say that everybody, does that. I mean, James Patterson, who we mentioned, will write for anybody and their mother and their sister and their brother and their cousin and the pets. But yeah, I mean, being familiar with you and your work, you aren't just stuck in one genre. You are sort of all over the place where you're writing for kids and adults and kids who can experience the books together, and I think each learn something unique from that. And from reading Once Upon a Placemat, that really did inspire with me, the desire to know, where did that come from, and what were you hoping to teach children, and what were you hoping to teach parents, and what were you hoping that maybe, the intermingling of the children and the parents would result in? Because I think that when you have a children's book, it can be, there's more give and take because it's not necessarily a solitary read. Mm-hmm. So it was a genuine interest. I didn't do that to just make you scratch your
I was
head
like, oh
and
dear.
call your friend. Phone a friend. I made you phone a friend.
I had to call my lifeline. And so I said, Julie, what am I going to do? I'm having him on my show, and if he's going to ask me deep questions, I better ask him deep questions.
And I'm not deep at all. You're going to get very transparent answers.
So she actually helped me for this show. I actually got my questions from somebody else because she thinks like you do.
That is scary. I'm honored and a little bit frightened.
So, this is her question from Julie now. Was your interest for literature and acting as a book reviewer ignited by your own writing?
It actually came more about from reading. I've just been a very passionate reader for a very long time now, and the more I sort of grew up with that, my curiosities as to process and inspiration kind of deepened. And so I would read a book and really enjoy it and then wonder, where did this come from? And how did the author create it? And what did they hope to convey? So it was more from the sense of a reader than a writer.
Well, I always enjoy Hans Christian Andersen. Like when I find out his background, this is why he writes these tragic fairy tales that I love so much. I find that very interesting where people get their ideas, and it's usually actually from a rough childhood.
Yeah, we all suffer and then we write or try to.
Right. So I do agree with you there. Things inspire us in different ways to write. So anyway, so you're just being more of a reader. All right. And I also want to ask you, did your interest in writing come before your work as a critic?
Yes. I've always been a reader, with the exception of a very short period of time in my childhood when I didn't want to have anything to do with reading or writing, couldn't spell very well. But my mom was on it. She read to us, and she sort of nurtured that love. So I finally reached a place where I discovered the gateway book. The gateway book is what I refer to as, that book you read it and then you just want to read everything after it. So for me, and this will be a little bit odd for a guy to say, but it was Nancy Drew. Like I totally fell into Nancy Drew, and I'm like, wow, she's intelligent and sophisticated and kind of attractive and adventurous. I like her, and I could see myself palling around with someone like her. And then, so I read like every Nancy Drew I could find. And the great thing about reading Nancy Drew in the, 80s and 90s is that there's about 5 million books to catch up on when you've been published for so long.
Yes.
But then, that sort of spurred me on to adult authors. So it was from Nancy Drew to Mary Higgins Clark, who I still read.
So do you like, would you say you like fiction then?
I would say I am more of a reader of fiction, and I really enjoy mystery and thriller. One of the really great things about doing this book column is I've sort of had to broaden my horizons, so I've read a lot more outside of my comfort zone and discovered a lot that way. But the interesting thing I've noted this year is I do tend to read a lot, but this year so far I've read more nonfiction than fiction, which is sort of atypical for me.
Okay. And what do you like about nonfiction, if you had... Now that you're having to read nonfiction, because in your role as a reviewer, what do you like about it?
Well, I like, everybody has a different perspective. So I like that you can get personal thoughts, personal histories, different perspectives. Something that really interests me is just somebody's, perspective, what their thought process is. Because even if we don't necessarily agree with what they're saying or what they stand for, I think it sort of gives us insight into how other people think and maneuver. And I'll say too, specifically for nonfiction, and I think that this is like a guilty little pleasure for me, is I find that instead of spending a lot of my free time writing, as I probably should be doing, I like to read books about writing and reading. Riddle that
Stephen
one.
King wrote a really interesting book on how to write.
He did. That's my favorite of all his books, oddly enough.
Me too.
It's great.
It is, because I think he's the one who taught me to not use an exclamation point, and I love exclamation.
Me too. Or 3 or 4 of them.
Especially when you write for children's books. I feel like you're allowed to have exclamation.
You are. For
You know?
children, they love that. They respond to that. You need excitement and emotion. And I have to make a recommendation for you. If you liked his book, one of the books that I read recently that just blew me away and changed my thoughts on writing and creativity, I'm not sure if you've read it or not, but Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. I haven't read it either. I saw the movie and I was like, oh, okay, and had no interest really in the book. But last year she published a book called Big Magic. Living Creatively Beyond Fear, something like that. I think I just completely massacred the subtitle, but it's Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. Fabulous book about the creative process and, sort of having the courage and the fortitude to just go where it takes you and to believe in yourself, even when nobody else does. So that was a really, really awesome read. I liked it so much that then I bought it on audio tape or CD, and she read that, and I think I liked it even more with the audio version because she just had so much passion. She read it herself and it just came through. So I've been recommending that to everybody.
I'm actually thinking of reading my own book, Ride a Horse on an Elevator. And
I love that title.
Thank you.
I love it.
Because that's about the conflict between my parents, my father, who, I was brought up in the city. I lived on the 16th floor in Queens in an apartment. My grandmother was so upset. She thought I should be in the country riding a horse, not an elevator. My father was upset because I'd go to the country and ride a horse, and he thought that was very dangerous. So,
as opposed to living in the city, because
right.
there's nothing dangerous about that.
I'd walk around by myself in first grade, and play at the playground with bullies and everything. I actually hired a guard. I hired a kid. I let him ride my little fire truck if he protected me from this girl that used to beat me up. I mean, so when you grow up in the city, you do learn street smarts.
You really do.
You have to.
And then you go to the farm, and it's a whole different experience.
Right, because then you're getting bucked off horses, and I was charged by a cow, and so that's
you
where I
can't hire somebody to protect you from that,
But what was interesting about your questions, because first of all, it made me think you read my book, which wasn't that hard. 'Cause for the fairy tale, that was only 1,000 words. So were you happy about that?
Oh, yes. That made my job significantly easier.
But I wouldn't say you, because you're never critical. I mean, you do like a little summary, and then you ask the author questions. So which is, I think, a really great idea, because then you're letting the author answer and think about it. And if they have to call a lifeline like I did.
Phone a friend.
Yeah. What does he mean by this? So that's kind of a unique approach, I think.
Well, yeah, what? I've had to mix it up a little bit over the years. So sometimes I will do straight book reviews.
Oh, you will?
I will. So it'll be, sort of a 5-paragraph in-depth analysis of something. What I've been doing more recently as well is trying to, maybe pick a theme or a genre and maybe do a review segment where I'm doing 3 or 4 books at a time in a more abbreviated fashion, just so that I can hit on more books, because there are so many out there and there's so many that I want to talk about, but it is very time consuming, especially, when
you have a real job.
I do.
First of all, it's not like you're doing this.
I have a real job.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a balancing act. So I have found that one way to sort of alleviate some of that stress of finding times is to alternate book reviews with the Q&A features.
Okay.
So it won't necessarily be a review, but I will have either have read the book, or have done my research on the book and the author. If it's, it's a mammoth 600-page doorstopper that I might not have the time to read, I still will do a pretty thorough research process before I submit questions. And I think that people respond pretty well to that, and that I try to cater it to them and their story.
Right.
Because I think that what happens oftentimes is authors who release a new book and go out on book tour or just do publicity from their home, they tend to get the same questions. And so I try to shy away from that and give them something to really sink their teeth into that's a little bit different. I will say that I usually start my interviews, with what's your inspiration, where did your ideas come from? Because I think that your audience expects that.
Right.
I know that that's one of the questions that writers either love or absolutely hate. There's like no in between. You
I was
love it
able
or
to
you
do
hate it.
I was able to do that one on you, but like I said, you stumped me on those other two. And the one that you asked me about how did the illustrator and I collaborate, I was so thrilled you asked that question, because people don't really realize what the collaboration that goes on.
Right.
Because she and I, it's not like she just read it and did her own thing. I mean, she's actually my sister-in-law and a
Right.
professional illustrator. And she just tossed everything and came down to spend the weekend with me in Mystic. So,
And that's so much fun.
and we sat at my dining room table with my grandmother's silverware. And we had to talk about what Mr. Knife would do, and is he able to do that with the way
Right.
he's shaped, and I don't know. So I was really glad you asked me that question. I was able to answer that one by myself, although I did read it to Julie, and she said something about nonverbal communication, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's a good word." So I used that. That was her word.
That's all
because
right.
Marianne's really
Look, you're
good
giving
at
yourself up now. You're telling all the secrets. But it's interesting when there's a collaboration, because a lot of times, the author is at the forefront, and sometimes, the illustrator or the co-author, they sort of get forgotten, and so their contributions might not necessarily be appreciated by people. But also, collaborations can be so different. Like, you actually had a sit down face to face with the silverware. Other people I've talked to have said, they've never actually met the person, who was their illustrator. So I love sort of getting that behind the scenes glimpse into the creative process,
I'm
because it
glad
just
you
differs.
asked me, and my sister-in-law loved my answer, so
I'm so
that made
glad
me feel
that
good.
helps.
Because actually, for my book, Anything But a Dog, I didn't know the illustrator or the cover designer. She hit it right on.
But you never know.
But you never know, because sometimes I know people are upset with the covers because they feel like
Sure.
it doesn't convey the book. But Marianne already had some of these illustrations done for me, and I wanted to stick with the same characters, but she came up with certain ideas, like the silverware peeking out from behind the windows in the house, and that was totally her. And that shaped how I told my story, because she had that illustration. So because I couldn't figure out how to start the story. So her thinking that way, I said, oh, perfect. Now I can, I don't know. So it really was a collaboration. So that was a great
that's
question.
a good collaboration.
Yes.
And you're still both alive and speaking.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yes.
All's well that ends well.
And I have my daughter as the co-author, Jackie Totora. She's married now. Her last name's Totora, because she came up with the title. I wrote that a long time ago as part of an excerpt from Ride a Horse on an Elevator, and she got so engrossed in it, she wrote her own little book and called it Once Upon a Placemat, taking my characters and having them. It's really tragic. They get sold at a yard sale.
Oh, wow.
But I don't want to tell you what happens, because that's why I called it a series, because she's going to probably do the next book, because she already wrote it. But because she came up with that title, I love that title, Once Upon a Placemat.
Title.
I thought, she goes, Ma, you don't have to put me as the co-author. I said, yeah, but you came up with that title, and now you can't use it for anything else.
You say you just saved yourself a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Those things get ugly.
So I just thought that was the perfect,
That's a great title.
And actually, her work is what's on the cover. Even though Marianne's a professional illustrator, I decided that my daughter's illustration, who's not professional at all, she's a 12-year-old kid who doesn't have, drawing skills.
Right.
I thought
Better than mine.
I thought her coloring skills were perfect to convey the childlike wonder of how you can really think about what is your silverware thinking.
Absolutely.
So I thought her design was perfect.
It was. It worked.
And that was I'm so glad I saved her work.
Yeah.
So I just think I'm sure most writers do save, hopefully, all their journals, diaries, photos, because you can use that years later when suddenly you find a purpose for it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so much fun to go and rediscover those things, or to discover those things in the first place about people that you really admire, and then it's like putting the puzzle together. I love that type of stuff.
Now, do you mind telling me what you're writing?
No, I wish I could figure it out. See, my problem is I start all different types of things, and I think I need to just pick one and go with it. The things that I'm working on predominantly right now is one, sort of a memoirish collection of essays about the experiences that I've had as a book columnist.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
so the people I've met, the lessons I've
Oh,
learned.
that's
Well, I'm
wonderful.
glad you think so.
Oh, I do.
You might be the one.
You
But
you better finish that idea because I would love to read it. I
oh, I'm
really would.
glad.
Because see, I read nonfiction. I either like fairy tales or nonfiction. I'm not as big on adult fiction, although I did get addicted to Jane Eyre and Hans
Sure.
Brinker and the Silver Skate. So I do read adult nonfiction, but it's rare because I have to read so much for the kind of work I do.
Sure.
It's hard for me to have fun. But I would read that book because I love nonfiction. And I'm very curious.
Well, now I feel like I need to finish it.
You
That's
need
great.
to finish it.
Yes.
Actually, that's what helped me finish Ride a Horse on an Elevator. I read it a chapter at a time to a first grade class, and having them wanting to know what happens next spurred me on. And maybe that's what you need is to share. Do you share it in your writing group, like a chapter from your book?
Yeah, I'd been a part of a writers group. We're on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but I agree that there's something about a deadline, that really
Right, if
motivates you, obviously.
Right.
But also too having sort of those people to cheer you on and to want to see your work
What-
and
and
to
wanna
expect to see your work, and then they give you a response to it, and that sometimes goes all the way. And so I would recommend, to any aspiring writer or non-published writer or published writer who's looking to be published again, is to join a writers group because you get, one, a deadline. There's an expectation that you're going to be putting something together.
Right.
But also you get that immediate feedback. And I think that the great thing is when you're with a group of people, you're going to get different perspectives, which is really important when you're writing. But also you're going to be reading what they're writing, and you're going to decide what you like and what you don't like and what you can learn from them. And then one of the biggest things too is you can read your own work until you're blue in the face, and you're going to miss things
Right.
that other people are going to pick up on right away. So I think that the author's best friend is having readers who can be that extra set
That
of
is
eyes.
actually how I learned to write, was being in a writer's group.
Oh yeah, it teaches you a lot.
Yeah, because I didn't major that in college. I majored in business management and marketing. Now, I had to take 2 English classes, and one of them was fairy tales, and the other is biographies, because those are the 2 things I love to read. How about you? What did you major in?
I majored in sociology, and I had a minor in psychology, and I also did a lot of work with criminal justice.
And is that why you like murder mysteries, maybe?
It must be. I think I'm just a very observant person, and you're going to find this really, really hard to believe, but I used to be like really painfully, awkwardly shy. That was me.
Really?
Like I would be the person in the corner not talking to anybody, but I knew everything that was going on.
Because you're
And-
watching and listening.
Yeah, and I still, things will come out of my mouth that somebody will have said to me 12 years ago, and I have that talent of pulling it out and using it against them at a later point in time. It just happened with my wife in the car the other night. She's like, how do you even remember that? But yeah, so I think I'm sort of an observer by nature, which sort of ties into the
Well,
sociology
you clearly
and
are, because like when you
psychology.
told me your major, when you gave me those 2 questions that I couldn't answer, I said, "What is he?" And then when you told me what you majored in, it made sense, and why my friend majored in similar major, and this is why she could decode what you were asking me.
I'm glad my education is finally
No, that
serving
really
a purpose.
makes you a good,
But I think it really does help, with observing the world around you and people around you. And I think the other thing too, when you study things like sociology and psychology, is you have the ability to empathize with people, which can sort of be a double-edged sword, because sometimes you probably feel things more than you should. But I think that, that's a perk of it. Though there is this strange segment of people who think that I'm just a sociopath and fake it really well. I'm not,
Do you
or am
ever
I?
write anything unkind, like as a book review? Are you a book reviewer or a book critic? Or
I
what
would
you
prefer
say?
to say reviewer. My philosophy tends to be I like to concentrate on the positive, so I spend a lot more time and energy talking about and writing about the books that I've enjoyed versus the ones that I haven't. Because one thing that I always try to keep in mind is reading is very subjective. What I like versus what you like can be 2 very different things, but I also, as an aspiring writer, I know what a difficult process that is. So I can only imagine, how challenging it can be to put all of your energy into something.
And putting your soul
Yeah,
into
you
a
put your
book and
soul
then have
into it,
somebody that
and you
don't
give it to
like
the
it or
world,
something.
and they don't like it, and they tear you apart, and they take you down. So I try not to concentrate on the negative. More often than not, if there's a book that I'm not responding to or that I don't think is particularly well written, I just probably won't review it.
Right.
Unless it's something I really, really disagree with. Like, I will give you, for instance, one of the few negative book reviews I ever wrote was for Killing Kennedy by Bill O'Reilly. That I just felt so passionately about that book getting the facts wrong and sort of just rehashing history as opposed to offering anything fresh, that I felt like, okay, this is something I feel comfortable taking a stand on. But for the most part, I concentrate on the positive, and I would rather share my opinions on that, and then you can feel free to agree or disagree.
Right, because I could never say anything negative about anybody's work because I know what it's like to put my soul out there, and so I could never say anything. And sometimes I've been asked to say something, and I said no.
I know
that's
it's
not what I do.
It's an
and people
awkward...
say, "Can you read my work?" No.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I don't. It's hard because I do read all day long for the work I do. But second of all, in case there's actually something that I wasn't fond of, there's no way I want to tell them. But I know that myself, I wouldn't be able to write if I didn't have people critique my work. But you don't know, you could be wounding somebody's soul, and so I'd rather leave it to somebody else to give them.
I leave it to Kirkus,
I'd rather leave it. Yeah, I just would rather somebody else because
Sure.
Some people are genuine. They want your feedback, and if I could tell that they really wouldn't be hurt, then maybe I would say something.
Right.
Like, well, maybe you could try this way. Because like when somebody criticizes my work, it's always better if they say, "I love how you did this, Lisa, but maybe I'm a little lost there. Maybe you could point to," you know what I mean? There's a way to do it that you're not crushing somebody's soul.
Oh, I agree, and I think that's very true. And I think that there's a way that you can do it more privately as opposed to publicly. Because once I write a column, it's out there. But if I feel like I might be able to offer something worthwhile, I might do that privately, in a phone call or an email, as opposed to doing it publicly on my column. But I agree. I think, like you, we're kind at heart. We don't want to be dream killers. We have our own dreams.
I would do that for movies even. I'll do it verbally on a movie because I'm telling people what I like. But it's so funny because what I think of a movie is so different from what other people think of a movie.
It's so subjective.
It's
true.
So subjective. Like, I like these movies where nothing happens. It's just, they're meandering around, but I love slice of life, especially if it's nonfiction. Now, we only have 2 minutes left, so let's the focus be on you. It is quick. Because there's so many things that you have interesting things to say. Is there anything you wish your listeners here knew?
Oh.
Is there anything
you
we
shouldn't
didn't
know
cover?
No, I would just say, obviously, I'm pretty passionate about books and authors, and I would just encourage people to not only read and explore and try different things, because you never know what you're going to like or not like, but if you find something that you're in love with, share it. Tell your friends, write a review, do something to sort of publicly acknowledge that, because writing, like so many fields, it's difficult.
Yes.
It's difficult to be discovered. It's difficult to maintain an audience. But as readers, we have the power to say what we like and to post a review.
You're right.
And
now,
to talk about
now
it. It's
anybody
huge.
can do that.
Yes.
On Facebook. Thank you for saying that, because it is, as an author, I know it's like I depend on readers to tell others.
And that's the hard part, is you put all your heart and soul into writing this book, but then you have to get it out in the world too.
It's endless promotion.
It is, and a lot of times I think we take for granted, oh, that was great, other people must think the same thing. But if we don't put our minds together and share that, there's the possibility that it'll be lost, and that's really sad to me.
Book clubs are good. That's a good way to. I think it's a good way to connect with people when you share a book together. Parent and child, or in a group of friends. You are sharing your common audience to one story, and can discuss it whether you liked it or not.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm not allowed to run over my time. But John, I loved having you. You got to come back again.
I would love to. Thanks
mind.
for having me. I will come back anytime.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on the Lisa Saunders Show, and I will see you next week.